Hello, I want to talk to you today about the theory of constraints. So, tomorrow I'm going to be interviewing one Mr. Eli from Israel, who actually worked with Eli Goldratt on the theory of constraints. So, why is it becoming very important in software to understand this concept? So, we have this wrong notion in the management lines that if you keep people busy round the clock, then we have greater productivity. So, we should disrupt ourselves before the market disrupts. And okay, that's still a good idea. But keeping busy all the time doesn't mean that you're going to get some productive output out of people, because unless you really know how systems work, that's counterintuitive. So there are a lot of people who actually created similar ideologies on flow in systems. So how things work in an organization flow, in a software flow, and so on. But theory of constraints helps you to understand the constraints that are there in the system. So typically a constraint is something that is prevent you from moving ahead. So it could be something that is obstructing you, something that is a bottleneck in achieving your goal. So given that, how does the theory of constraints help you to achieve your goals and objectives? So basically, your job would be to understand what a constraint is in your piece of software that you're trying to achieve, or your products and solutions. So let us say that the other day I was discussing with another colleague of mine, a friend of mine. So he happened to say that they are dependent on one guy who has Docker knowledge. So he's one big bottleneck in the company currently, because all the work flows through him to Dockerize the application. They have to go through him, and he's the single point of contact for getting everything done. And in another instance, I remember we were all dependent on DBA. There was only one particular DBA for our project, and he was like loaded from multiple quarters. And no matter how quickly you finish all the other streams of work, when you get to him, it is a bottleneck. So there is work that piles in front of him, and unless he releases it, you cannot do the remaining part of the work. So that was a huge bottleneck that was there. And apparently, so I was talking to my son the other day, and he was asking, okay, what are you doing on theory of constraints? And then I told him this is what company. So his quick answer was, he's still in his 10th standard. So his quick answer was, why can't they, add an additional resource to solve the problem? So that was his quick take on it. So why can't they get somebody else to help them solve the problem, so they can have a parallel resource? So if it's a resource hungry machine, they could add more RAM and make it a high speed machine. If it is people, they could add people who are skilled with that sort of stuff. But there's another thing that you also need to take into account, which is the Brooks law, which says that if you add additional people to an already delayed project, it is going to get delayed even further. So that's also counterintuitive. So what it means is people have a ramp up time when they get into projects. They need to understand how things work, and then they need to scale up and be productive. And so if you just add people and say, okay, we'll get more resource, it's not going to work that way at all. So you should be actually understanding the constraint and then working around the constraint. So they say that exploit the constraint and then give highest priority to the flow that where the constraint is there. So bring out the constraints in your system, exploit the constraint, not the team. So don't overwork the team. So exploit the constraint. So basically, if you're saying that we will get some work done by that person, ensure that the work queues in front of the person in an orderly fashion, and it is completely streamlined, and the work output is also completely streamlined, so that there is no wait time, either waiting in front or after the queue. And then at the same time, the constraint is not overloaded until the point of time it remains a constraint, and so on. So ensure that the constraint is able to pull data, and not the data is not being pushed to him. So work is not being pushed to the constraint. So you actually work that, and ensure that you're not allowing inertia, as Goldratt calls it, to create constraints in the system. Ensure that you're having a proper flow within the organization. So Don Randstein also talks about this when he talks about organization flow in his seminal work on organization flow. He talks about the same thing. So let us say that you need to buy eggs because you get eggs cheaper. You don't stock eggs for 6 months to 3 months in your refrigerator because you got them at a wholesale price. So because the cost of storing and saving and is going to eat up, it will be much more than the cost of going and buying it every now and then that you need it. So that right optimum that you're looking for the organization flow, of course there is time consumed in going to the grocery, buying it, stocking it up and stuff like that. So there needs to be an optimum between the other extreme of going too many times and not going at all, because if you store it in the fridge for a certain amount of time, it's going to go stale and it's going to rot. So you'll not be able to make use of it that way. So theory of constraints is they're everywhere in our system, in our lives. So they say that you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. No matter how solid your chain is with all the other scaffoldings and tightening around the entire chain, the value chain, but at some point of time, if your system has a weak link, that's enough to break the chain. So similarly, no matter how great your processes are within your company, within your architectures, products and solutions, so if there is a certain weak part that it can be exploited, so that's your constraint basically. So even in cybersecurity, it is said that no matter how great you fence your front door with all the iron doors and metal doors and electronic programmed locks and stuff like that, but if you leave the back door open or the weak back door or a side window, then that's enough for an intruder to get in. So that's typically your constraints. And I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Eli from Israel sometime later next week. So you could look into understand more about the theory of constraints and how it helps you to understand things like throughput accounting, how do you understand, get a better flow in the organizations, improve your value chains, and finally add value to your customers and ensure that you're looking at the right pieces of data and not getting scattered around with firefighting with a lot of data on your table, not knowing where to act. So the theory of constraints helps you to do exactly that. So here is leaving you with this quick bite. Do like, share and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.